Organizations and people. Now, this is going to be the first dimension we're going to consider. Now, even though we've listed these 1, 2, 3, and 4, for ITIL's purposes, they're not necessarily in a given order of consideration. They are just listed that way so we can have a way to present it to you inside this video. But I really do think that organizations and people is the first one we need to talk about because it is really one of the most important and one of the hardest to get right. When we talk about organizations and people from the service management perspective, we're thinking about the way we're going to form our organizational structures to support the services and products that we want to deliver to our end users, which is those customers and those consumers. Now, when we talk about these formal organizations, this can be something as large or macro as the way we set up our business. Is our business going to be a sole proprietorship? Is it going to be a limited liability corporation? Is it going to be a multi-level conglomerate? Is it going to be based in the United States or is it going to be based outside the United States? All of those things are formal organizational structures. But then as we get a little bit tighter into the organization, we think about the way we set up the organizational hierarchy inside the organization. Are we going to have a very vertical organization or a very horizontal organization? Let me give you a couple of examples of this. My company, we happen to be a fairly flat organization. We're fairly horizontal. And that means because we're small, we only have 5 to 10 people who work for us at any given time, we can talk to each other directly. We don't have to go up through bureaucratic channels. But some places I've worked before have had hundreds of thousands of employees. As somebody down in IT, I can't go and talk to the CEO. It's just not the way it works. I would talk to my manager, and that manager would talk to his manager, and eventually that message might get up to the CEO. That's a very vertical organization. And so these are things that you have to think about when you're deciding how you're going to structure your organization. If you're going to be very flat and very horizontal, that means you might be able to do things quicker and faster and be more creative. But if you're very vertical, you might be much more process-oriented. And so these are the kind of things you think about when you start thinking about, are we going to deliver our services through a very formal organizational structure? Also, when you think about organizations, how are you going to break up the company? Are you going to have it broken up into sales and marketing as one department, and then the IT services in another, and then the help desk in another, and the administration in another? Well, that all depends, and that's all going to come down to that formal organizational structure. Now, once you figure out what that structure is, you have to staff it with people, right? We have to find all the right people to do the right jobs. And that's the required staffing and competencies. That's that whole human resources part of this whole thing. So once we figure out that we have this company and we have all these different departments we've created, now we have to hire the right managers and leaders for each of those departments and all the right people for those departments. And then we have to make sure that those people stay up to date with their skills. I don't know about you, but I've been working in IT for a long time. It's been about 20 years. And computers today and the way we run them is completely different than what we did 20 years ago. All along the way, my managers and my leadership had to make sure I was going back and getting new training and new skills to make sure my competencies stayed with the current technologies that were out in the world today. And then we have to think about the roles and responsibilities for each person. What is each person's role in this company? What are they going to do? If you're going to be the everything person, and in small companies, you sometimes have everything people, where you have somebody who is going to be the teacher and the editor and the marketer and the salesperson, right? But in most companies, if you're large enough, you're going to have a single role or responsibility. You're going to be an accountant, and maybe not just an accountant at large, but you're going to be a specific accountant for a specific account or a specific customer, right? This is the idea of roles and responsibilities. I have people that come to me all the time and say, I want to get into the IT world. I want to be in IT. I say, great. What do you want to do in IT? Because there are hundreds of different jobs inside of IT. You need to figure out what that goal is, what that role is that you want to attain, so that way we can figure out what the right path is to get you there. And this brings us down to our fourth consideration under organizations and people. And this is what we call culture. When we talk about culture, we're talking about the shared values and attitudes of that organization. And this is by far the hardest thing to get right. So if you look at a company that's out in Silicon Valley, a lot of these startup companies, they have a very friendly culture. It's very informal. You might walk up to the CEO of the company and be like, hey, Brian, how's it going? But if you're working for somebody like IBM, that's a big company that relies on processes and procedures, and everything is done in this big formal method, well, that's a different culture. If you look at Facebook and you look at IBM and you look at a hospital, they're going to have 3 different cultures. Now, is one of those right and one of those wrong? Not necessarily. It all depends on how your organization wants to set it up so they can take care of its organization and the people inside of it. Now, another part of culture is the communication, and how are we going to communicate within the organization? Are we going to be formal or informal? Are we going to do it in person or by email? All of those things are things that are a cultural thing inside your organization. How much trust and transparency is there in the company? Do your leaders up top tell you what the plans are for the organization? Do they share the vision? Do they share the goals? All of that stuff starts at the top and then works its way down. If you have bad culture at the top, you're going to have bad culture at the bottom, right? And so we need to make sure that we're getting the right culture out to our people. And finally, when we're talking about leaders, we need to have leaders who have a vision of where they want to be, and they need to be advocating for the values and for that vision. So if we're going to say that, our most important thing for us is making sure that our people are taken care of, but then every time your people have a problem, you kick them to the curb and you fire them, that's not really living the values you've been setting. And so you want to make sure as you're thinking about all this stuff, how that culture is going to work together. So when we think about that organization, that's all of those pieces. And then we have the other side of it, which is the individual people. Individual people have a lot of things as well, right? Each person has their own management and leadership style. Your CEO may have one vision and your first level manager has a different vision or a different leadership style, right? And that's going to be an issue. And so we need to think about that when we start talking about organizations and people. We also have to think about the people and updating their skills and competencies like I talked about before. How we're going to communicate and collaborate with our people on our team and outside of our team. How we're going to share the knowledge and share all of our specializations. And then we also want to think about how we're going to facilitate value creation. Because at the end of the day, the whole thing about culture and organizations and people is to be able to do something, right? Creating that product, creating that service, which gives value to that consumer. And if we can't create value for our consumer, we're not going to be in business very long. So that's why we have to think about this. When we think about products and services, the first dimension we think about it from is through the lens of the organization and the people. How are we going to set up the organization? How is it going to function? What kind of culture it's going to have? And how do we take care of the people so that the people can deliver those products and services?